Well, thanks everybody for coming. We're kicking off, I guess, not another academic year, but another calendar year of TLTR, Teaching, Learning, Technology Roundtable. I've asked Tracy Gies, who's a senior instructional designer, to speak to us today. And the reason is I had a conversation with, and I'll just name names, Terry Keebler in our power sports program. And he said, David, I don't understand what an instructional designer does. What do you guys do for me? What's your role? Like, I know you're there, I know you're a resource, but I really don't understand, what that dynamic is, how that instructional design piece fits between the deans and sort of the students and the teaching and all of that. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to bring people in from the outside to sort of maybe help explain that process and how it's utilized in other schools to kind of give you sort of a perspective of how we want it to be utilized at our school. I know we've been a little challenged um, at this school because we've changed that instructional design role from being a service to being part of the academic, whole kind of milieu. So we're integrally kind of stitched now into the teaching and learning process and much more integrated with all of you that have teaching contracts. So I thought maybe that would help. Anyhow, let me introduce Tracy. He's senior instructional designer at Bellevue and has been there for quite a while. Did a really nice doctoral PhD on the critical roles that instructional designers play in an institution organization such as ours and the one that they have down at Bellevue. So, Tracy, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. I've got a little presentation to show here.
Do we need to share screen with you or?
I think so. I think it looks like I've got it.
Okay, good.
You should be seeing my slideshow here in presentation mode, hopefully.
Yep.
Okay, good. So yeah, like David talked about, I'm going to talk about instructional designers. I've titled my presentation "What We Do and How We Do It Usually," and I'll kind of talk more about that as we go along, because there can be a lot of variations to it. So a little bit about me, as I'm Dr. Tracy Gies. I have 18 years of experience in higher ed, all of it as an ID. I've had various roles. I've been a senior ID and um, so a manager of the ID department and just kind of an individual contributor. But that's where I'm at right now as an ID here at Bellevue University. I have 15 years of teaching experience in higher ed. I have a doctor of education in interdisciplinary management, interdisciplinary leadership from Creighton University. We also have faculty status in Bellevue University College of Business, at least I do. That's something that they're kind of moving to at BU, is offering faculty status to some of the IDs since our role is so academic in nature. At BU, I teach communication arts and the Master of Business and professional communication. So today's goals, I just want to provide you with an overview of what it is that IDs do and how we do it. I'm going to show you the BU process, and then I'll have time for questions at the end. Also, if you have questions along the way, just feel free to chime in. I'm going to ask David to help watch the chat and see if there's any chat questions. So what do IDs do? Are we leaders? Are we followers? Are we collaborators? Are we consultants? Are we all those things? It turns out really that we're a little bit from each of those columns, and it just depends on the situation. There's certain aspects of development that we might lead, certain times we follow. Pretty much throughout the whole time, we're collaborators and mostly consultants. But that all kind of relates to the situational context of design and development. There's time pressures, there's ambiguity, there's relationships, oftentimes building new relationships with faculty and other members of the design team. because sometimes you might be working with programmers and developers and video video producers and that kind of stuff. It depends on what your unit's like. You may not have those things at MCC, but we have them here. We've got quite a few of them. So we've got at BU, we've got 15 IDs, 15 instruction designers, 4 or 5 video producers, a few programmers, and some kind of UI experts, user experience, user integration experts. So the nature, the ambiguity kind of relates also to the nature of design, because when we're talking about design of courses, we're talking really about unstructured problems. There's a lot of different ways that a course can be designed. They may all be correct, and everyone's going to have a different idea possibly of how the course should be designed. So an ID can kind of help navigate that. A lot of times what we see is that in my role as an ID, I'm talking to faculty a lot about the different ways that a course can be designed and what the drawbacks and benefits of our different designs. Some of those things may not always be obvious to everybody. And on top of that, there are many different design processes. You've probably heard of Ed.D and Dick and Carey and Sammer, and there's a whole bunch of them. But those and everyone's got a different idea as to how those work and what should be used. But an ID can help navigate all those things. We use our knowledge of pedagogy, knowledge of process. We're all, at least at BU, we're all sort of project managers. We all manage their own projects. And that's something that an ID can help you with. There's a really important note here is that the ID field is dominated by individual practitioners. There's no standard way to design, no standard way to collaborate. And it all depends on those situational contexts and who's involved and when they're involved. IDs, this is kind of goes back to my dissertation study, where I looked at the individual experiences, the lived experiences of IDs, and looked at how organizations can better support IDs and how we can better partner with faculty. The kind of at the root of this is the fact that IDs have unique experiences based upon what they learned through collaboration, through their own experiences. We all work on varied projects, and the nature of relationships with faculty and other members of the development team is very important. We learn a lot from those relationships as well. When you might wonder, well, if there's so many different ways of doing things, how do IDs learn what's best? How do they learn different ways from different people? A lot of that is we share knowledge, as David said. We share knowledge a lot. We do a lot of these things, not only within our organizations, but outside of our organizations. And that building those communities of practice is very important. And we also learn from faculty as well. I've learned from faculty different ways of approaching how they approach teaching, ways that I didn't think about. And I think those things are all important in terms of how we do and what we do and how we do it. Collaboration and trust building are keys to what we do. I think that a lot of times being very honest about what the challenges are, what our roles are, what we can do, what we can't do, what we won't do, such as we won't take control of your content. We won't tell you that you can't include something or how you have to write your content. That's something that you own. And we also build leadership skills throughout our practice. So how we do it, we do a lot of analysis. We analyze the needs of the learner, how the faculty wants to teach the course, what kind of technology is available, the limitations of the LMS, the limitations of our authoring tools, all those kinds of things. But IDs are really part of the core mission of universities, which is to teach students. So we help with our experience in pedagogy and experience designing a lot of different courses. That helps us to be more flexible in terms of design and in terms of how we work with faculty. And again, I mentioned communities of practice. That's really important. Maintaining those communities is an especially vital part of what we do and why we do it. I include teaching experience here because not all IDs have teaching experience, but they should. And I think that IDs that have teaching experience are a lot better at the job than those that don't. Also, I think it gives you more credibility with faculty. And throughout all of it, IDs need to remain calm and flexible, kind of differentiated from the chaos that a lot of organizations have. Everyone's concerned and worried about how to design courses and how it's going to be presented to students, and faculty may be concerned that's the first time they've taught a course or first time they've taught a course online. It's the job of an ID to remain calm and flexible and just let everyone know that we can do this. We've done it before and we'll do it again. Okay, so now I want to go into a bit of a process example related to specifically to how we do things at Bellevue University. Got a couple important notes to cover before we go into it. Number one is that this process doesn't apply to all projects, not even at BU. My own estimate is about 20% are outside of this process. It applies only to new development. It doesn't apply to course revisions. I want to point out it's also possible to be too process focused. Sometimes when things come up, it's important to look outside the process and just communicate with people, communicate with the team, and say that just let everyone know as early as possible that there's a change. And again, IDs are typically de facto project managers on those development teams. So if there's concerns about resources, concerns about timing and that kind of stuff, IDs are there to help you with that. So the process begins with SMEs developing content after they get approval to do so. That approval, it probably varies at different organizations. At BU, it goes through colleges are involved, there's marketing is involved. We want to find out, is there actually a market for this program? Is there a market for this? Will students enroll in it? How much is it going to cost? That kind of thing. And after that, after they get approval and before they start writing content, we'll have a kickoff meeting, and the kickoff meeting is actually kind of where the development starts in my own perspective. Typically, we'll talk about learning objectives. Learning objectives may not be finalized at this point, but we can start talking about what the learning goals for the course are. We'll talk about scope. At this point, scope really relates to number of weeks of the course. If there's any special requests that faculty might have, we'll talk about if there's any kind of tools that faculty want to use or may think that is maybe useful in communicating this to students. Faculty might be somewhat concerned about how they're going to assess the course, and we can talk about those things at this point. And we'll talk about schedules. Again, we'll talk about when content is due, if there's any recurring meetings needed. A lot of times, if it's the first course in a program, we'll tend to have probably meetings every other week that involve the ID, the faculty. If there's a SME, a program director might be involved, and then dean or assistant dean might be involved. It just depends on what we need for that course. And I always like to cover copyright and ADA considerations at this point, just so faculty are aware of those things. We can't violate copyright, and we have to keep ADA considerations in mind. The course has to be accessible according to the law, and we can't violate copyright according to the law. So here's a scheduled example. Again, we start with SME content development. IDs aren't normally, as an ID, I'm not normally terribly involved at this point. I will I'll contact the SME or the faculty. A lot of times the SME and the faculty are the same person, but not always. I'll contact them and just see where they're at. if there's anything they need from me, and if they believe they'll be able to meet their delivery deadlines. And the time we set aside for content development is about 30 days. Then after I get content from the SME, I'll go over it. If I have questions about it, I'll get back with the SME. If I have ideas for possible for learning objects or any kind of interactions, I'll talk to the SME or the faculty about those and see what they think, and we'll work that out at that time. And I've got 28 days to build the course in the LMS. And that also includes time for building any kind of learning objects that go with the course. Those don't necessarily have to be done at the same time as the course build is done, because there's a lot of time between the time we start development and the time when the course begins. There's actually the time allowed, the time allowed in this development process is about 3 months. If you added all those days together on the right hand column, I think it comes out to about 87 days. So it's spread around 3 months. Then after the course is built in the LMS, I'll schedule and conduct a QA review. We've got a QA team of about 5 or 6 QAs that they do a QA against the course, do a QA of the course against an established process, an established checklist. And they're mostly looking for things like spelling, grammar, do links work, does it have all the things that are required of it, such as, are the learning objectives there? Is there a course syllabus in the course? Those kinds of things. Then we'll get that review sheet back from the QA resource. We'll go over it. If we have any questions for the QA, we'll ask it at that point. But then at this time, we just go ahead and make changes in the LMS and note it on the QA revisions on the QA report and send it back to them and keep a copy for ourselves. And then there's next 2 steps in the process, which is faculty peer review and mock student review, typically happen at the same time. So I'll let the PD know that it's been through QA, and now it's time for faculty peer reviewers. And faculty here at BU, they can choose whoever they want. Typically it's 3 reviewers, and they use a peer review checklist as well that they go through. And there's a separate mock student review, which this is done by the QA team, but a different QA person does it. And they do it with looking at the course in a student view. This way they can be sure that there's anything that only a student would see, that it works. So all the links work. In the student view, does the course look right? Is everything still there? Can I access all the information? And this is also, again, where they will really stress kind of the ADA considerations, looking at making sure all the videos are captioned, everything's screen reader friendly. Is there images missing alt text and that kind of stuff? A lot of times at this point, if there's any ADA considerations that have been missed at this point, especially we're talking about things like alt descriptions and that kind of stuff, of something that's very technical, we'll typically have to go back to the SME to write those descriptions, and we can help add them, but we'll need a SME to write them. And at that point, then we implement our faculty peer reviews, revisions from those faculty peer reviews. I should add too that we actually, at this point, I always go back to the PD and look at the reviews and say, what are these, what do you think of this? Are there things that you don't agree with? Should we implement all these, or should we implement some of them? And I can also give my own perspectives and recommendations at that point too. And we'll also implement faculty, the mock student review revisions at this point as well. Then it goes back to the PD for review and approval. And if they have any questions at this point, usually they don't. They've been involved in the process for this whole time. So there's usually not too much back and forth at this point. Usually the review and approval is pretty quick. And there's no standard checklist that PD reviewers use to review their courses. They know what they're looking for. Credit hour verification worksheet is something, again, that's owned by the PD. It's really not part of the development process as I think of it, but I included it since it's part of our schedule. Then I implement PD review revisions. Again, if there's any questions for the PD, I'll go and ask them. And this is again where we do a lot of collaboration. And after the PD reviews, it's a dean review and approval. That's usually one of the quickest reviews because by this point it's been reviewed 4 times, 3 times. So there's really not much to be done at this point. And then we move the course from build to master, and then course snapshot and course start. So any questions about this process or anything I've covered so far?
Oh, sounds good.
Okay, good, good. So I'll just kind of summarize here real quick. Again, the role of IDs is partnerships. We're partnering with faculty throughout the entire process. We're also partnering with other individuals in the development team, such as video producers and programmers. Our role really is advice, consultation, leadership when needed, and followership also when needed. The best leaders sometimes follow, the best followers sometimes lead, and that's kind of really the way I see the ID role as from my experience. We're throughout the whole time, we're all always learning from each other, learning from our own experiences, and learning from faculty as well. I want to emphasize again that faculty own the content. There's never any point where I would touch the content and make changes. If there's any questions about content, I'll go back to faculty about that. And the BU process recognizes ownership at each phase of the design. And it's important for IDs to be flexible and adaptable throughout the entire process. So I'll send the slides out to you if y'all want them. But I've got references here, including my dissertation, if you want to read that. And if there's any other questions at this point, it'd be a good time to talk about those questions. We've got a good half hour, at least of this session, if there's anything you want to ask or discuss.
Felicity, you want to just ask your question? I saw
Sure.
you put it in the chat.
Yeah, I was just wondering, for the content that the subject matter experts provide to you. So say I'm a teacher, I've been teaching this for a while. How do I know how much to give you? Like, is it all my assignments, my textbooks, my lectures, my videos, and how do I know how much is enough?
That's a really good question. I think that at BU, we do have a template that we can provide faculty, which kind of shows what we're looking for in each week, what our recommendations really for what should be in each week. But that's all. A lot of that is really driven by the credit hour verification as to how much you need. At this point, you may not have all your assignments thought of. You might have a lot of questions about how you can assess it. And again, that's where you'd go to an ID for, ask an
Okay.
ID for recommendations on that kind of thing. They won't write the IDs won't necessarily write any assessments for you, but they'll help you figure out how it should be assessed.
Well, and the one thing I would add, Felicity, is if you sort of get lost in how much, one of the experiences I had, I worked at an engineering school and none of the professors had taught online. And they were like, David, I want my students to know everything. I said, well, they're not going to like that. That's going to be too much. It's going to be an overload. So you go back sort of to those outcomes, right? That's sort of your guide of, okay, well, what is this chapter? What's this unit cover? And where can I get these learning materials? Are they out on the web? Are there stuff that I brought with me? Sort of go back to that. And that's, as an instructional designer, that's sort of what we do, right? It's like once you get a little overloaded, it's like, okay, let's bring it back to the center and kind of unpack this and make it so that it's chunkable or consumable for you and the students. Mary asked a question. Are there any AI tools that you've been using for ID, Tracy?
That's a really good question. We're starting to get more into that now. And actually that kind of relates a lot to to the assessment question. I've used AI to help devise assessments. And I think that AI is going to become much, 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 much more important as we go along. And I think it's very hopeful too, very useful. Some LMSs have it built in. I know Ultra has AI built in. I think you guys use Canvas.
Yeah.
I don't know if Canvas has anything built in yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do, or if they will soon. But AI can be really helpful, and I think that if you haven't started playing around with it, I would recommend just seeing what it can do. It takes a little bit of skill to write the right prompts for AI, but I think that there's a lot of things, there's a lot of ways that it can help you.
Yeah, I think, where I've seen faculty that I've worked with use it is, and most of them have been new faculty that I haven't taught before online, and that's writing those objectives, right? I just
Yeah,
tell them, write a paragraph of what you think you want the students to learn in chapter 1 or unit 1, and have it help you write those objectives, you know, what those outcomes will be and those kinds of things.
that's
Just
good advice.
it's a
Yeah,
very, very useful tool, very
yeah.
useful. So for me, when I kind of describe what an instructional designer does is, I want you to take kind of a mental picture. If you've ever been on vacation and you go to those resort hotels and they have the little concierge station, and you walk up to the concierge person and you go, how do I get a cab to go here, or an Uber? And then I want to see this, and what's the best time of day? And, and then I want to get back here for dinner, that's sort of what we do, right? In a
Yeah.
different way, shape, or form. It's, we're the sidecar that wants to help you achieve your teaching goals. And, if there's something that you don't know about, sometimes we don't know about them, in terms of technologies, but we can play around with it and look into it and give you some guidance. Other questions, comments?
I've got a question for both David and Tracy. What skill in the ID toolbox do you think is most underutilized that people don't know about that you'd like to kind of surface or highlight for us?
That's a good question. For me, I think it's probably just our knowledge of pedagogy. Not that faculty don't have that as well, but we might have a different perspective on it. Um, we've got a lot of experience with and training in pedagogy. Faculty often do too, but not always. So it varies. But I think that a lot of it too is just again our knowledge of the process of the process that we use. I think a lot of times faculty kind of get lost in that. There's a lot of questions about how to start, how to end. How do we know when we get to the end? What happens in the middle? What if I had a snag with time or with resources? IDs can help kind of work around that kind of thing. That's especially true for IDs that have been in the organizations for a long time and been doing the job for a long time. It's like we know how to move a project along. So we know what's important and what's not important. That's really
Yeah, I
kind of
think
what
it'd
it
be
comes down
interesting to
to.
hear from Mary on this too, but I'll give you my perspective. So I'm kind of like Tracy. I've been doing it a long time. Um, I think one of the things that people need to know is there's always a lot of rules, right? So this is kind of for some of our new faculty members like Felicity. I'm sure you've heard me talk about this. So you come in, you're new. You got a dean, you've got your goals, outcomes, and objectives, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of rules. There's stuff like quality matters that you hear, and you think, well, I don't know anything about any of that stuff. I got this job. I just wanted to teach. Um, that's sort of I sort of my approach is to be more personable. We'll get to the rules later. Let's just get to your teaching. What do you want to do? And I can make it fit into sort of that institutional must-have structure, just by probing. So kind of unburdening you and giving you the freedom to just, think and be imaginative about how you want to reach students and what you want, what's important, and then work back into the goals and objectives, and, the assessment.
That's really good. I agree with that completely. Yep.
Mary, you got any comments? You've done this quite a long time too.
Yeah, Jane Franklin was with me at the beginning when I first started at the college in 2005 as an instructional. Well, I didn't go instructional designer until later, but I will say that when I worked with faculty, I mean, I heard a lot, that there was such time constraints. Well, now that I'm full-time faculty, now I understand it. I understand um where those barriers come from. It's kind of interesting because, I grew up with the master's and the doctorate in online learning, and I've kind of switched a little bit to loving the classroom. I really love having the students there. I think the hybrid for me is probably the better fit. I love online, but I feel so not as connected as with my students who are in the classroom. So I'm kind of trying to look at ways to, overcome that and to connect more with my students who are online.
Yeah, that's kind of been sort of the approach that I followed too. Is I've always liked the classroom better, because there are some limitations with online. And so when I work as an instructional designer, I don't want my faculty members to feel that burden, that there are those kind of limitations that we can, it's my job to sort of fill in those blanks. But if you've been a classroom teacher or you're excited about teaching in the classroom, I don't want you to lose any of that and feel like, you've got to shoehorn it into this weird thing called online learning. I can sort of help give guidance on, what the differences are, but I don't want you to lose your, that joie de vie, for teaching.
One thing that's really neat that I've seen is since I work with students who are just coming to college, I'll ask them why they didn't take it online, and they'll say because they were scared. But the hybrid really, by the time we're done with the quarter, they feel so much more confident to have online courses because we've been working in Canvas and we've been, they've been doing their assignments. So that's really exciting to me, is that we have that quarter to help them transition and to look at the online and give them some support in learning how to take classes online.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
Fear is
scary.
that they're going to be alone. Yeah.
hmm
Yep.
Yeah, it can be very scary. And you think about, both of our schools, so Bellevue and MCC, we serve, a lot of non-traditional students, right? So older folks that may not be quite as leveraged with technology as some of the younger students, and, apprehensive about coming back to school or learning in an unfamiliar way from when they learned 20, 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, and again, I think that's sort of what instructional designers can help sort of give those perspectives and, give encouragement to educators, because even as educators, you may have, some trepidation about, well, I don't know if I'm prepared to teach online, or, what about all these questions that the online students are going to ask, or, so again, just that sidecar, I get assigned to faculty members, but I don't ever feel like in my role that I'm ever, unassigned, right? Once you have a relationship with me, it's there kind of as long as I'm at the institution for you to give me a call or to run things by me, I think that's a real critical role that a lot of instructional designers play.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we, as IDs, we have to remember too that faculty are people. Faculty are human beings. And they have the same kind of fears that other people do. There is trepidation, a very natural trepidation with new technology. IDs feel it too, because new technology is coming out all the time, and IDs have to learn this, and then it's, after a while it gets kind of tiring, and there's always this kind of pressure to adapt new things when they come out. I remember, I don't know, it was 10 years ago or so when they're telling us you got to figure out how to use Facebook in courses now. It's like, do we really have to figure that out? Like if it's useful, it'll come out, it'll just come out, right? But I think that a good thing that's all in the past now, I think for the most part. But there's kind of all this, the notion of you know, that every new technology has to be adapted or adopted by education, but it doesn't. And IDs are kind of susceptible to that as well. Simply the nature of our jobs, but we have to guard that as well. Just kind of this pro-innovation bias that every innovation is good because simply because of the fact that it's an innovation. It's not true. So, and I think IDs need to guard against that as well.
Yeah, at least give some insight. We
Yeah.
had earlier in the year, and I know Tracy, you were there. We had the woman. What was her name? Naomi from UNO that talked about the AI. What was her name?
Yeah.
Cassie.
Yeah. So Cassie was here, and she was saying, well, you know, our chancellor, or I think it's chancellor at UNO, she's paid for all of our students to have an open AI account, right? Because they want to be, you know, cutting edge and having students use the new technologies and embracing those kinds of things. So a lot of times your leadership, you know, wants to get out in front and over those skis right away as innovation leaders, and they have a certain agenda. And then I also think then it falls on the instructional designers to kind of figure out, well, is it going to work or is it not going to work, or where does it work and how does it work? And, you know, the other thing that I will say is that technology and institutions, technology and teaching is a never ending kind of chase. So if you think, you know, we're done, once AI kind of gets figured out, we're done with that, I'm good. You know, I know how to use AI. There will be something else that will be coming your way, right? Like there just always is another innovation that, you know, is always kind of forward thinking and how is it going to be applied to education. So one, don't be afraid of it, but two, leverage your instructional designers to kind of help you assess and utilize those tools if you know you can find it useful in your teaching.
Mary had a question about cognitive overload. So I think that my cognitive overload kind of comes from too many things at once. So I think that you kind of limit that, make sure that you're not presenting too much information at one time in too many different formats. I think that just kind of make sure you're chunking the content well, and don't load up with a lot of videos and a lot of this and a lot of that. Kind of less is more. A less is more approach is the right approach to make, I think. And in terms of assessments, the assessment should make sense. They don't have to be writing. Shouldn't be a 10-page paper every week, you know, unless for some reason that's necessary. But in most courses, it's not.
Well, and yeah, you know, as a good instructor, you're trying to seek feedback from your students, especially, you know, if you're just a first time teacher, you know, whether it's face to face or online, you know, sometimes you can go too far, sometimes it's not enough. Students are good if you ask them, you know, to kind of give you that feedback. And then, of course, if you're teaching and you have a contract like we do at our school and others, you know, 2 to 3 year term contract, the course is not static, right? So you're going to learn things. Oh, I want to spend more time on this, or, you know, maybe a little less time on that, or, you know, maybe I should just scrap this whole quiz thing and do this more as a discussion. Again, those are conversations you can have with instructional designers, you know, kind of as a counseling sort of thing. You know, I tried this and it really didn't go over very well, and they didn't do very well on their assessment. You know, is there some other strategy that I could use? Your courses are like living beings. You know, some people don't see them that way, but I do. Some people like to just teach the same thing every term and, maybe only add a few new things, which I guess that's okay. If the content really warrants it, but in the more kind of creative, abstract areas of higher education, I think you should always be thinking of your course as an evolution, right?
It's good to, I think, at least every few years, look at your course. See if there's anything you want to change, anything that students have asked to be changed, and things that you know aren't working as well. And it might be you don't even know why they're not working. But again, as David said, you can go pick an ID's brain, see what they think.
Well, and if you don't know where you want to make changes, sometimes you can leverage the students, have them, they're really good with the technology tools. Have them do some of the searching for new things. Maybe you know something, pretty innately in your subject matter. But there's new evolution. There's maybe some new journal articles, or there's new research, or there's, you know, whatever it is. Have your students explore some of that for you and bring that forward to you. Generating new content from your students can be very appealing to the students that are going to follow. Any other questions, comments?
This is Felicity again. I know the presentation was kind of about creating a new course. I assume also, because you've kind of mentioned it, IDs also, like, say you've been working at the course for 3 years and you're like, could you just look at it and be just, give ideas for improvement and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We do that as well, and that's something that's initiated by a program director. They'll say, they might have an idea about some changes that they need to make, and they'll go to an ID and say, this is what I need to do. How do I do it? Do you have any other suggestions for what could be changed? And we'll make up those suggestions. At the end of the day, again, it's up to the PD, it's up to the program director as to what they do, and when it happens too. So I think that, yeah, that's something that definitely IDs can do.
Any other questions, comments? Jessica, do you have anything to add? I'm gonna pick on you a little bit.
Pick my brain. Go ahead. I just wanted to mention, like, and it's been talked about before, that don't be afraid to make changes in your courses, because a lot of the time when we go through the course development process, instructors think it's like the end all be all, and they can't make modifications, especially once the course has been taught. And I always like to suggest teaching the course for at least a year or two and get a sense of how the course runs, and then make updates and modify as you go.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Are we done? What do you think? I guess so. I didn't see any more questions come up. I didn't see, Naomi didn't say no. Keep going. Well, Tracy, we want to thank you for coming. I like one of the things that I like at Bellevue, which is a little different than what we do at MCC, is you guys have a very nice, rigid sort of timetable, a structure. You have those dates sort of. Ours is much more fluid. But we're a younger department. We have a lot less people handling sort of those things. Very much more broad-based in terms of the things that we teach. I mean, we go everywhere,
Right.
from
Absolutely.
English to arithmetic to floral arrangement to
auto mechanics and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we don't have any of that.
So it's always a new endeavor whenever I meet somebody new, their perspective. And a lot of time I really enjoy some of the more obscure things that we have on our course catalog, you know, learning from folks on, you know, about things like interior decorating or,
Yeah.
again, like floral arrangement or some of those kinds of courses, the courses that we do in the applied, you know, skills, those are automotive and machining and those kinds of things are all kind of new to me.
I always,
I will-
David, every time I work with a faculty member on a different course, I always come away wanting a career change. Like, oh, maybe I should have been an electrician. Right? Oh, I
Yeah.
really actually meant to be a
Yeah.
chef. Um, so it is really fun to dig into those classes with people. Tracy, thank you so much. This was so interesting. It's
No
just really
problem.
good to see like what
My
happens
pleasure. Yeah.
outside. I think
Yeah.
we're really big and we just assume that the way we
Yeah.
do things is the way
Right.
that
Yeah.
they ought to be done. And I think it's
Yeah.
just really instructive to see that there's other ways and to learn what those might be. So appreciate it a lot.
And I'll
Yeah, I
add
think-
that process that I showed in my 17, almost 18 years that I've been at BU, that's probably the 5th process. So yeah, so many changes here too. You know, it's going to change again. It's just like no one can guarantee anyone that their process won't change. It's improved every time. So
Yeah, I just like the fact that I think you did answer the question, you know, that the faculty member presented to me, David, what is it that you do?
yeah,
I don't understand. I don't understand the scope of your job. I know
Yeah.
you have this title,
Right.
but I don't know what that scope includes. And it really just includes
Yeah.
a lot.
it does. And I think a good answer to that is just to start with, well, what do you need? And then go from there. And I'll tell you whether it's something I can do or not. If it's something I can't do, probably give you some advice on who can do it or how you can do it or something like that. But it's a pretty far ranging and broad ranging job, really. ID is kind of it's a big job title. And that's kind of partly why nobody really understands it too. I think because I don't know, I mean, it's bounded, but it's not, the boundaries aren't real hard or steadfast or anything like that. So, yeah,
Well, and for those faculty of ours that are here, you know, it doesn't just mean online learning. So if you want to
Right.
talk about
Right.
classroom learning and things that you're doing in the classroom face to face, we can give you support with that just as fluidly as we do with online. Thank you, Tracy.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Good to see you.
Bye.
See you later.